Hello everybody. In this lesson I will discuss trigonometry. More specifically, I will introduce the theory of reduction formula, cofunctions and reduction formula, as well as negative angles. The next thing I want to explain is something we call reduction formula. Now, first of all, it's important to realize what the cast rule is. Now, that means C stands for cos is positive in the fourth quadrant. The A means all functions are positive in the first quadrant. The S in the second quadrant is sin is positive there, and T in the third quadrant means tan is positive there. Now the reduction formula are 180 minus theta, and that one lives in the second quadrant. The next one, 180 degrees plus theta, lives in the third quadrant. And then the last one, 360 minus theta, lives in the fourth quadrant. Now how this works is, if I give you sin 180 degrees minus theta, then we will always reduce it to this angle there, the acute angle. Therefore, it becomes plus sin theta. Now, where does the plus come from? It is because the 180 minus quadrant is the second quadrant, that is sin's quadrant, and sin is positive there. The next one, if I give you cos 180 degrees minus theta, then you will always reduce it to that angle, so it's cos theta. But can you see it's negative cos theta? Why? Because the 180 minus quadrant is sin's quadrant. Cos is negative there. When I give you tan 180 degrees minus theta, you will reduce it to this angle, so it's tan theta, but the sign is negative. Why? Because the 180 minus theta quadrant is sin's theta. Tan is negative there. Cos 180 degrees plus theta, you will reduce it to this angle, so it's cos theta. Why negative? Because in the 180 plus quadrant, cos is negative. Tan 180 plus theta becomes positive tan theta. This angle is the angle that you're going to write there. And can you see it's plus tan theta? Why? Because the 180 plus quadrant is tan's quadrant. When I give you cos 360 degrees minus theta, you will reduce it to this angle, and therefore it's cos theta. And why is it plus? Because the 360 minus theta quadrant is cos's theta quadrant, so it's positive there. And then the last one, sin 360 minus theta, is then minus sin theta. So the angle is this angle over there. Why negative sin theta? Because 360 minus theta is not sin's quadrant, it's cos's quadrant. Sin is negative in that quadrant. I want to explain to you the reason why sin is positive in the first quadrant and the second quadrant, and all of the theory behind the cast diagram. Now let's quickly do this. This is the cast diagram, and then there are your three reduction formula. Now if you look on the right hand side, the first graph you find there, this is the graph for y is sin theta. Now there, this is 0 degrees, and then 0 up to 90 degrees, this is where you find the first quadrant. And then 90 up to 180, that is your second quadrant. This is the third quadrant from 180 up to 270, and the fourth quadrant you find from 270 up to 360 degrees. Now, back to the graph. If you look at the first quadrant, can you see that your sin graph is positive in the first quadrant, and it's also positive in the second quadrant, although it's a descending graph, it's still positive. So when you go back to your cast diagram, can you see I said in the first quadrant all three functions are positive, and sin is positive in the second quadrant as well. Now the second graph, there's 0 degrees. The second graph is the graph of y is cos theta. Now if you look at this, there you find the first quadrant, and can you see that cos is positive? And again, all functions are positive in the first quadrant. Now if you look at the second quadrant, can you see I said that cos is negative in the second quadrant, and this is the reason why. It's because of the graph. And then even if you look at this, if you go to the fourth quadrant here on the cos graph, can you see that the cos graph is positive in the fourth quadrant? And this is why with your cast diagram, your cos is positive in the fourth quadrant. Cofunctions and reduction formula. Now let me explain cofunctions first. When I give you sin 10, then the answer is 0,173. And if I give you cos 80, the answer is also 0,173. So therefore you can say that sin 10 is equal to cos 80 degrees. We call them the cofunctions. And please note it's usually this angle and that angle. When they add up to 90 degrees and one is sin and the other cos, then it's cofunctions. Now back to the reduction formula. There's two of them. In the first quadrant, fixed there is the 90 minus theta, and in the second quadrant it's 90 plus theta. Now they work like this. When I give you sin 90 degrees minus theta, then the answer is plus cos theta. So what you do is you change the sin into a cos, and then this angle is that angle. And why positive? Because in the 90 minus quadrant, all functions are positive. When I give you cos 90 minus theta, it becomes plus sin theta. Can you see cos changed into sin? This angle is that angle, and then plus because all of them are positive in the 90 minus quadrant. Sin 90 plus theta becomes cos theta, but can you see it's positive cos theta because 90 plus is sin's quadrant. And then when I give you cos 90 plus theta, it becomes minus sin theta. Can you see? Cos became sin, the angle is theta, the angle is theta. Why negative? Because the 90 plus quadrant is sin's quadrant and not cos's quadrant. So you refer back to the original sum there. Negative angles. Negative angles are formed when measuring in a clockwise direction. So it works like this. If you measure in an anti-clockwise direction, you get your positive angles. And when you measure in a clockwise direction, it's the negative angles. Then when I give you sin of the negative angle, the answer is negative the sin of the positive angle. So the angle becomes positive. But why negative? Because if you look at this, this is cos's quadrant and sin is negative there. When I give you cos negative theta, the answer is positive cos theta. So the angle becomes positive, but then cos stays positive because that is cos's quadrant. That's where you find the negative angle. And then tan negative theta becomes negative tan theta. So the angle is positive, but the sign is negative because that is cos's quadrant, not tan's quadrant. In the next video, I will discuss special angles and angles greater than 360 degrees. Click on the video in the left-hand corner to take you straight to the next lesson.